Okay, you guys are here to see the retail panel. Thank you for coming. Hey, my name is Jennifer Small. I'm a partner at Malone Commercial Brokers and the vice president of MEREDA. With me today is Taryn Trefethen of Brookfield Properties. Brookfield manages and owns real estate around the globe, including 160 retail properties in 7 countries, comprised of over 134 million square feet. Here in Maine, she is the manager of the Maine Mall. Also with me today is Nick Margitza. I know Nick very well, and I always butcher your name, so I apologize, of WS Development. WS has developed over 100 properties comprising of 22 million square feet across 13 states, making the company one of the largest retail-led mixed-use developers in the country. You will find all of our bios by scanning the QR code in the program you picked up during registration. Programs are available at the front desk with Shelley if you don't have them. Okay. So our goal today is to discuss the retail environment both locally and nationally. Our experts will be able to tell us what they see driving retail in today's marketplace and tell us how they see retail trends affecting real estate. It will be interesting to hear from both of these guys because they have differentiating portfolios. One is more of an enclosed mall, while the other is a lifestyle neighborhood type center. We will have time for questions at the end. So please save all your questions for that moment, and please use the microphone because we are going to be recording this. Okay, let's get started. So Nick, I'm gonna start with you. What are you seeing some of the big retail stories in 2024?
Thank you, Jen. Is this working? Everyone can hear me all right? Good afternoon. Lots of familiar faces out here and some new ones too. I look forward to connecting with people afterward. A lot of wisdom and perspectives that I can learn from too. So I'd love to chat with all of you guys afterward as well. 2024 is a big year. One thing that I've seen is just the continuation of e-commerce integrating into the physical retail space. And that's an overarching national trend that is affecting down to the local level as well. And what that is the integration of e-commerce and the maturation of online shopping, and what are the impacts of that onto a local shopping center, onto a mall, onto a single tenant building. And 10 years ago, I think people were really wondering what those effects were, and now it's become a little more clear. And people are finding that they really like to be, in-person shopping. There's certain things. They want to feel a tomato before they pick it, right? They want to try on a shirt. They want to get their hair cut. If I had hair, I'd get my hair cut. That kind of thing. You can't do that stuff online, right? So there's a place for these things, and it's all about adaptability. And I think the past year has really shown that. I think too, one thing quickly, and we can probably touch on it a bit further, is that the big national trends sometimes don't always, trickle down onto the local level, and sometimes they do. And I think as you zoom in to each market, there's different answers, different solutions, different issues that define each one of those places. I'd say overall, one big overarching thing is the just increasing costs, and you guys have probably heard this all day, but no doubt that it's affected retail, real estate, and development and leasing as well. Is that at the end of the day, rising costs to borrow and rising costs to build puts more pressure and more attraction to existing space, which drives demand, which drives rents up, which drives vacancy lower, right? So in great markets where you've got a lot of activity and dense space, you're seeing that type of tightening on the supply side, and that's a good thing for people that own a bunch of existing real estate. As you go into more local levels, as national retailers are being more data-driven, just more than ever, how does Maine stack up in terms of a priority to other markets across the country? And I think that's a really key thing, and something that I've heard from feedback from lots of national retailers is, sure, I could do business there, but how can I prioritize that in the face of other markets across the country? And I think that's something that across all these different asset types, it's something that we are, or asset classes that it's on all of us. That we're all working towards that same goal, which be to increase the sort of economic activity and attraction for these places. So it's a big answer, but I think we can dive into some of these things a little further too.
Taryn, being manager of the main mall, what do you see? How did you see fourth quarter sales, and how do you see that moving into 2025?
Well, overall, I'm going to be coming from more of a property management standpoint. So, boots on the ground. I see the bags in people's hands. I see their ages. I see, their demographics, essentially. I talk to managers. So what I saw overall in 2024 and what our portfolio saw in 2024 was sales are up. People are spending. They're smart about their spending, and they're using their dollar towards a value. So they're using it to, especially for discretionary items and stuff that's more of a luxury. They're doing their research. They're finding coupons. They're finding the next sale. They're really being smart about where they're putting their dollar, but they are spending it. I think a lot of that comes from not knowing where the economy's going and interest rates going up, and where people have jobs and they have money to spend. They're spending it. They're just being smart about it. Q4 at the mall was good. What's interesting about Q4, our December sales were up across our portfolio as well as the main mall comparative to 2023. But also, it's interesting, Black Friday has taken a little bit of a shift. The traffic is there, but the sales aren't as significant. When I say sales, I mean the percentage is off. You probably saw this too, Nick, I bet. But you have your Old Navies and your American Eagles, and they're always doing significant sales and doorbusters. But then I'm walking the property and I see 30% off this, 20% off this, and it's really interesting. And what retailers are starting to do is they're spreading those sales out throughout Q4. They're doing their Black Friday sales in October, some of the slower traffic months. So note to self, next year, make sure you come in October where there's less people, less crowds to battle. But I will say that those significant sales do come back in the last 2 weeks before Christmas. But it was really interesting to note, especially Best Buy. Usually you see them lined up on the curb, and there really wasn't a significant amount. They did a lot of their sales prior to.
So there's been some really interesting reuse of the retail properties that we've seen. The wellness sector has been something with the medi-spas and physical therapy and those types of uses. How are you seeing the readaptation of these centers? Food is another, interesting backfill that we've seen.
Yeah, I'll jump in. And one concept that Taryn just raised, which I think is something that we focus on a lot at WS, which is relevant and not on our agendas, but just something that makes sense to bring up, I think, is the distinction between four-wall sales and just overall productivity of a store, right? So, for example, if you are selling sandwiches and your performance out of that space has a lot to do with what business you do, almost entirely the business you do within those four walls. Whereas if you're selling sweatshirts or whatever, you might go on, you try a sweatshirt on, you buy the sweatshirt, and you say, that's the best sweatshirt I've ever owned. I'm going to buy 3 of them. I might not go back to the store, but I might buy it online. Now I've got the brand, I've got the model, I've got the size. I'm totally that way. I find one pair of pants and then bingo. I've just... but it's you're taking advantage of that opportunity to go touch it, feel it, buy it, and then go back. And I think everyone in this room has probably had some type of an experience where they've done that. And that translates into what you're saying, which is maybe the traffic was there and the sales were off, but the retailers get that, right? They're smart and they know that these stores are, in some cases, billboards, in some cases, showrooms, and in many cases, a place where they're doing their business too, right? And I think on the more regional and national level, you get retailers who see that opportunity and take advantage of that, and then versus a mom and pop or a local business that the lifeblood of what they do is what they can sell at that single cash register. So I think that's just an interesting kind of thing to note. On your question though, Jen, specifically about wellness, and it was interesting to hear earlier on the hospitality talk You guys are going to think that I just took all my notes from them and just shared them with you, so I apologize if, but no surprise. A lot of those things overlap and are very similar on the retail side, where wellness comes and manifests itself in like 1,000 different forms, whereas it used to be maybe a big full-service gym. Now you've got full-service gyms like the Planet Fitnesses or the Miller Fitnesses of the world, like a great regional concept that's got a bunch of locations. Boutique fitness, where you've got a local spin studio or yoga, Pilates, whatever you want to call it. And then there's these health and wellness concepts where it's recovery centers and skin medi spas and what have you. And it's like an explosion of all these wellness-oriented type businesses. And that's totally separate from the dining, food and beverage side of things, where what you might see a kind of master of nothing national full-service restaurant replaced by 2 or 3 different small shop fast casual restaurants. One's focusing on salads or Mediterranean, and it's sort of like the Chipotle-ification of restaurants, where you get these, kind of ethnic focused concepts that are doing one thing or a couple of things really well. And I'd say like they all kind of get bubbled up or rounded up, tied into like this wellness thing, right? Which is people with aspirations. They want to be healthier. They want to be fit. Whatever, that kind of thing. And there's all these different ways that real estate and retail and services all kind of come back into that. So.
I'd like to kind of step in there too, because I think personal care is also a little bit of like a sister to wellness. Our personal care has just, it's consistently growing year after year. I think a lot of that is to a lot of influencers and social media and just where what people see on TV, online, et cetera. But you have, for a while there, JCPenney was taking Sephora inside. And now you see Target taking Ulta inside. And, our local Target here did execute an Ulta inside their space this year. And we didn't see any significant impact at a main mall level. Actually, our personal care grew. So it's really interesting that the tentacles that personal care has, and it is very much sister to wellness.
Yeah, great. So talk to me a little bit about vacancy rates. So you guys both have significant portfolios, both locally and nationally. What are you guys seeing for vacancies and how long they're taking to backfill?
Yeah, I have the distinct benefit or opportunity of working on lots of different markets and seeing what those look like and the different dynamics. That the dynamics in Damascotta, Maine, are very different from Augusta, which are very different from Westbrook, which are different from South Portland to Boston, or the 128 belt or the 495 belt surrounding those places, right? So it's like every one of these places has its own unique kind of profile, and the problems, solutions, and goals for each one of them are a little different in each one of those places. And so I think like that's key first to note, is that like there isn't like one answer that answers that question across our entire portfolio. I'd say like in each place it's got a different kind of set of parameters that we're working within. And I think that's too like a big part of like the professionals in this room is like figuring out being realistic about our expectations with comps, coming together to the table, what's missing, what's not missing, and that's how you're going to get your best opportunity. Is like sometimes there's opportunities where there's net new sales, like that Ulta example is a good perfect one, where you go that was found business, right? Like it was there waiting to happen, and boom, like you did it within that store. But then I think it's the true fundamentals of retail, the overarching things that sort of don't matter about the market. Great access, great visibility, sight lines, signage. Man, like the amount of focus that tenants put on signage now more than ever is incredible. Like I think that's something that data has really affected, where these, especially nationals or franchise businesses, what have you, right? Those guys have clearly worked with the consultants and third-party folks that have convinced them that having true great sight lines, big signage opportunities as much as possible makes a huge difference to their business. And I'm going to pick on Convenient MD as an example. Like if you see their locations across the state and across the country for that matter, it's like, whoa, there's convenient MD. And when you think about it, if you're like, you're in that phase where you actually need to go to one of these things, you have good earache or whatever, it's like, what do you think of? Well, maybe convenient MD, right? So like there's a bit of a, like you see like the value and I think every one of these retailers is focusing on that type of opportunity too, whether it's Jersey Mike's or anywhere in between, right? So it's signage, those basic fundamentals I really think drive the vacancy rate, and to kind of loop it back to your question, I'm getting there, is that when you're in markets where maybe you're not in the first position, you're not in the second position, or you're in like that third or fourth position within a market, and you're lacking some of those key fundamentals, good access, good parking, good visibility, that's going to drive to vacancy, right? And if you're in a place where you can be nimble and where the market supports rents that allow you to be adaptable in your real estate, to invest into it, to increase those types of things or those factors, then that's how you solve for that vacancy. But if you're in a market where the rents don't support that and the costs have outpaced the rent potential, then you're left with a really tricky situation where you've got not adequate space, that maybe not in a great position, that doesn't check some of those boxes, and you're kind of in you're in that tough spot, and that's where I think that's a big hill that people need to climb, and that's where you see some interesting reuses of places. And I think a good example of that, which has been in the news, which is close to home for me, I grew up in Waterville, is the Capitol Heights project in Augusta. A great example and something that I'm excited about for Central Maine.
Taryn, what are you seeing in the mall?
Sorry. We see more like tenancy. So people want to come in if you have an Apple or if you are close to an American Eagle. What we see is that rental rates and vacancy are going hand in hand. They're partners to each other. For the mall in particular, not a lot to rent right now. We're over 99% occupied. But we have some of these small shops. So it gives us some flexibility to kind of, flex our muscles locally, and then start conversations with, 2-3 years down the road when some of these potentially underperforming tenants are not seeing the sales that they want to see. But we know that because we have the Lululemon, because we have an American Eagle, a Pink, an Apple, that we'll know that these retailers want to come.
So one of the trends we've been seeing, I've been doing real estate now for almost 25 years, and when I first started, there was no national retailer to be found in downtown Portland. And now we've got Madewell, we've got Anthropologie, we've got Athleta, we've got Urban Outfitters. How is that impacting your differentiating portfolios? And is there a market for two Lululemons,
In my opinion, I don't think there would be a market for two Lululemons. We're the one and only people. Because just because of, now that's currently. Now we do see a population that's due to grow, but right now I think we have to be really aware of what our, what the state of Maine wants, and where are they spending their money, and is there really a need? Now, if we get another Trader Joe's, that would be great. I think the market could sustain that. I think it depends on the actual retailer. And a lot of what is in downtown, which is downtown Portland, which is beautiful, beautiful storefronts, beautiful build-outs, good uses down there, it makes sense. It makes sense to what's happening. And where we're at, we make sense. So I think we're catering to the entire demographic, not just in the trade area, but for the state.
I'll just piggyback on that. I think that's totally true. It's retailer by retailer dependent in the offering and the different markets, and for sure. This does kind of circle right back to what I was talking about earlier about four-wall sales, and on a national level, how that doesn't tell the whole story, right? So a store can operate in the Old Port or South Portland or up at Augusta, whatever it may be because they see the halo effect beyond just the store. And I think that a good example of that is we've done a bunch of work with J. Crew and J. Crew Factory over the past year. They opened up 8 stores in the WS portfolio. And one thing that when we sat down in their offices and worked with them to do a big expansion, a key thing for them is that, they have so much data on all of these different all the customer profiles, and they say, yeah, well, we're capturing that customer in this market today, but putting a store there cracks open this opportunity to just get that much more out of them. And so it's a way for them to double down on a already loyal customer. So I think that's the opportunity, is where they can double down on an existing loyal customer, maybe build some new business as well. And there's some great examples of it. I mean, these guys with the amazing new Warby Parker store, first of its kind in the state. The type of customer who goes in and buys a pair of glasses, tries them on, and maybe buys another pair online or whatever it is. So it goes beyond. There's that halo effect, and I think that's the key thing to be thinking about.
Right. I worked on the West Elm deal, and when we put that in there, they use that store solely to drive online sales, essentially. So it's a big showroom, essentially, for them. So it's really interesting how that works. They weren't worried about who was going to be, buying a couch and
dragging it out onto
dragging it outside the front door. Exactly. It's like, oh yeah, great. We can have that shipped to your house in 3 to 5 days, and we'll help you pick your fabric. So,
can I just piggyback a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just in the point of not saturating the market, but to do multiple types of uses within the market. I mean, but you have a home goods. We have home goods like every town, I feel like, at least in southern Maine, it seems. That works. I mean, they're still strong. So it definitely is the type of people that we're catering to, and what that retailer is. So I think it's a case-by-case basis, like you said.
So Taryn, this one's more for you. The mall has been a mainstay in our state for years and years, and seems to be a lot going on both inside and outside the mall and the properties that you guys own. Can you tell us a little bit of, kind of what's going on with some of the reuses that you guys are seeing, not just inside the mall, but on, exterior, land sales and properties and so on and so forth?
Yeah, well, mostly there's conversations happening, some of which that I can't disclose. We did, so our properties consist, when you look at the main mall, you think of it as all one entity, all one owned property, and in fact, there's multiple different owners of different parcels. So Macy's owns their own building and their parking lot, and then they've sold off a lot of out parcels, where Tuscan Table is, where Kobe is, etc. And then we have the old Sears anchor, and that was just purchased by Dick's Sporting Goods. So they're due to do something exciting, hopefully, in that on that parcel. So we no longer will have that vacancy box. But then there's also conversations that Brookfield is having with local development, that, throwing around ideas of, potential residential. And there's been plans that have been submitted, but nothing solid, and back and forth, and maybe some healthcare facility. Do they want to purchase some property? Because the main mall, Brookfield actually owns more so of the back end of the property, meaning where Hannaford, your property, where Hannaford is along Philbrook Road, that back end is Brookfield property. So we have a lot of property. A lot of it is, some of it's green, and some of it's actual parking lot. So it's interesting that there are conversations happening. It goes so slow, and it frustrates me. But it's my job to just run those up the chain and just keep a finger on them as they go and say, hey, how are we doing here? How are the conversations happening here? Can we push this forward? What do you need from us here at a property level? And a lot of it is just communication and good relationship with South Portland in particular, with the city of South Portland, which have been great to work with when it comes to redevelopment. So they've been a partner, so it's been great. So I think that there's so much opportunity, and it's an opportunity we have to do in order to compete. There's, mixed use with Rock Row that's happening, and then you have the Downs that's right down the street. So there's other things happening, some great things that are happening, but how do we be just as relevant? Because right now we're feeling that we're the only game in town, and how do we keep that? So that's where we're going.
So Nick, you've been doing this a long time. How are you seeing your centers change over the years, and what are you guys doing to keep up with the newest trends?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think like overarching, it's just a more services. What used to be a Payless Shoes, it may now be an urgent care or a great Medi Spa or a new fast casual Greek restaurant. Like there's a million different things that service oriented things that you can't get online, right? The type of stuff that you look, feel, experience. And so that just time and time again is like I'm seeing more and more of these spaces being converted to that. And it usually comes with a pretty hefty price tag up front to bring the type of utility or infrastructure in place to accommodate that kind of thing, whether it's a dentist office or a restaurant. And I was in preparation for this and just kind of working through my own deal pipeline that I'm working throughout Maine and New Hampshire. Like a really good chunk of my business right now is these medical adjacent type tenants. So right back to what we were talking about on that wellness side. So certainly a focus on that and converting those spaces to have that type of infrastructure. And one thing I've seen too is like after you've made that investment, then you're not just leasing a vanilla box that's going to take X, Y, or Z to take it to the next level. I've got a restaurant space that forever is going to have some more value to lead it in that direction. So yeah.
So one of the conversations we were having as we were prepping for this is, kind of new tenants on the horizon and what we're seeing out there, who's coming to town that maybe isn't here, or maybe who is here. And we came up with this concept, what's old is new. And I brought up, New Balance. New Balance was a
great example. Yeah.
Was a dead brand when I was growing up, and now I have like 14 pairs of New Balance in my back hall. So tell us a little bit about that and what you guys are seeing and how these kind of older, outdated tenants are kind of coming back into your portfolios.
I can kind of piggyback off your New Balance. It's pretty interesting. New Balance, the old dad shoe, is now becoming even more relevant. It's exciting, what's old is new. And what's also interesting is that New Balance did a sponsorship deal with our very own Cooper Flagg, who's now 18. He's 18 years old and playing for Duke University and is on to great things. But an 18-year-old, they just did a sponsorship with an 18-year-old. So I know you want to say something.
No, totally. And I think like that's saying it's a great example. It's obviously a Maine-centric example, and so like we can all get behind that. And so, and obviously New Balance's relationship in Maine with factories in Skowhegan and elsewhere makes it feel all that much more real. But it's the CEO of Gap is doing a huge effort right now to get their tentacles into the latest trends and the influencers and fashion icons, music artists, what have you, and just to reinvest and reintroduce their brands. Gap is the parent company to a lot of different brands, and so how they can continue to stay relevant. And one concept that we had chatted about in preparation for this, which I think is kind of interesting, is much in the same way that you are. New space is expensive to develop. New brands are expensive to develop. And so when you have an existing brand, existing intellectual property, existing sales data, all this existing infrastructure, sometimes all it takes is one sponsorship or one really key partnership, rebranding, reintroduction that you can really take a doubly advantage of all those different things that were existing today. One thing that I've seen, which is just worth chatting about, I think a little bit, are some of these restaurant brands that are what I'd consider like legacy restaurant brands. The Margaritas of the world, Pizza Hut, Domino's to some degree, although that was a bit longer ago, where they had their big reinvestment and kind of leading on the tech side. But they've totally done that. They've gone in and they've taken, I grew up going to this type of restaurant. It sort of has faded, or it's, it's sort of in the back of people's mind, and then they reinvest into it, reintroduce it to the market, apply some new data and tech, and then redeploy it, and all of a sudden it's new and interesting. Someone told me, in the same spirit of like what's old is new, it's like it's not a line, it's more like a circle, right? So like as things come and go, like I'm not much of a fashion guy, but that's what I hear on the fashion side is that, I don't know, some things, come back like that, so.
Yeah, we had Abercrombie and Fitch.
Yeah, great example.
Think about like maybe 7 years ago, and they ended up pulling out. They reinvented themselves. Now they're getting back into physical stores, and they're looking to test markets with pop-up uses. So it's definitely I think they reinvented themselves for a reason. They were pigeonholed, and now they're actually able to expand their customer base.
Yeah, that's been a big concept throughout Maine that we've seen a lot of, these rebranding tenants wanting to do a pop-up and testing it out. Kind of segueing into, what are you seeing in terms of that's attracting people to Maine or deterring people from Maine in terms of new tenants? So our house was one of the tenants that you and I had discussed, and you had some thoughts and some feedback about, why or why not they may be or may not be coming to Maine.
Yeah. We'll keep that question mark open.
Exactly. Are they coming?
I think right now, to go back to what I kind of touched upon before, is that, do we have the demographic to sustain an our house? Do we have the demographic to sustain a Gucci or an Hermes or something like that? We have to be smart. We have the demographic to sustain a Zales, if we're doing apples and oranges there. But you understand what I mean. Now, that could change in 5-10 years from now. But going after tenants that are going to succeed will ultimately help us as a landlord succeed. So we're not going to grab at those, our house where they just will ultimately not succeed, potentially. Sorry for everyone who's a fan. But, we have sister properties that have an our house. So if you are able to afford that brand, you are probably flying into that airport to buy that brand.
Yeah, I just going off of that, which I totally agree with. We're talking about on the national level, these national type tenants, they are so data driven that I think the days of like putting your feet up on the desk and really persuading them to come to one market or another, like I don't see as much of that happening. I think there are instances where if they have a good hunch, like, I do think I can do some business there, and you're offering me very attractive terms, then maybe that's something that they'd go look into. And you mentioned it, maybe not on like a full term investment, like on some type of testing the market basis. But it all comes down to the basic, all these different companies that are using very similar type of data analysis to say population growth, income growth. They're looking at the seasonality of the projected market, which is something that in the hospitality they were talking about a lot, which is totally true. I mean, you think about a brand and what they can do for business in a hot day in August versus a cold, rainy day in February up here. And these are all the things that they're factoring into their decision making. And I think moving forward, things like the Rue Institute, things like some of our biggest challenges, I think, sounds a little corny, but like our biggest opportunities, like where we have tons of green space that can literally be developed into densifying these places to bring more people. Brunswick's a great example of this. Like I've been doing a lot of work up in Mary Meeting Plaza and Cook's Corner in Brunswick, and 7 years ago, like I would have never believed the amount of momentum that we have, and it's directly driven towards the densification and diversification of the different people, things, services. It's got its own heartbeat up there. It's not just Portland adjacent, right? It's like there's enough going on up there that's going to support its own Barnes and Noble and Planet Fitness or all these different things that. So it's good for the communities. The things that are good for the communities, that are good for hospitality, that are good for industrial, that's good for the residential market. These are all things that all combined are good for retailers and their ability to prioritize main markets moving forward.
So in 2025, I mean, there was some discussion about online sales and how some of these retailers were going to be closing, and their bricks and mortar stores were going away. Are you guys seeing what I would call as a rebirth birth of the physical store, in terms of, Abercrombie and Fitch, I guess, is a good one. That was hot, back in my day. And, they kind of went away, and now they're back. But are online sales hurting any of these stores from a physical bricks and mortars?
I mean, I think Nick kind of touched upon a little bit of that is, you buy a sweatshirt online, you realize you love it, or you buy it in store, realize you love it, get it online. So I think it's helping each other out. To my comment, it's a value-based person too. You're going to a physical store, you're seeing your price comparing over, different social avenues, so Amazon, your Temu, or whatever. What can I get? Can I get these pair of pants somewhere else that's less expensive? Being smart about your dollar as well. And then obviously the Abercrombie and Fitch example too.
Yeah, I'd say that as retailers become obsolete or there isn't a place for them, thinking like the Bed Bath and Beyonds of the world or Big Lots, what have you, it's liquid, right? Like there's movement in these things at all times, and it's never just in one direction. And so, sure, like the world for a Bed Bath and Beyond isn't quite what it was 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago, for that matter. But there's now a new market for all those different health and wellness services that we were just talking about. A great example of what we're talking about, and interesting reuse of space, is in Westbrook. We have a former Shaw's box, 60,000 square feet, and it's about to be the region's largest pickleball, attraction, right? And this is a big franchise, national account. This guy who owns this thing has operated and owned like 50 plus Planet Fitness, is super sophisticated type of operation that's going to attract people from all over the state. And right, like it's like one goes away, there's new type of demand. And that's sort of trust in like our economy, and just that people want to go out and spend their money and do new things and partake in this whole experience, right? And so like the concepts change. The demand for space is forever. Like good space, I think there's always going to be a place for that here in Maine and across the country. Yeah.
So we got a couple more minutes before I open the floor to questions. What do you guys see as the major drivers as in 2025, or any major challenges that you guys see in 2025?
I'll go first. From my perspective, it's kind of granular. You have to it's not just one driver that's helping us and driving people to our center. It's knowing our customer, knowing who we're bringing in, where they're spending their money, what they're doing with it, who they're bringing with them, and how do we get them to stay? What's their dwell time? Are they able to, accommodate a child that's 2 years old to a child that's 17 years old? What can we do to do that? Now, a lot of that is we're catering to everybody. So it's, in our case, we have experiences, we have entertainment, so that the teenagers can go and shop while mom takes little Benny to the ropes course at Jordan's Furniture. So it's getting, and you stay for the day, you eat there. So it's really understanding that. It's also understanding the tourists, the time of year. Essentially, we have 2 holiday seasons at the property, and I'm sure a lot of shopping centers during the summer months. We see just as many people at our center during the summer months as we do during our holiday season. So we have to capitalize on that. We also see tenant employees. They fluctuate. We see, I think it's about 2,000 employees that the mall employs, and then that number goes up both in the summer months as well as holiday. So what are they doing when they're here? They're eating, they're having coffee, they're taking snacks, they're walking the mall, they're window shopping, and so we have that sustained environment for that customer. And then we also want to look at as a driver, we want to see what are the future drivers. So where do we see the property 5-10 years from now? Brookfield is really about team effort, and each property has their own team across the portfolio that focus, and they're each sector. So we have a leasing, we have a property manager, we have a development that all think about what's best for this property, not only today, but 5-10 years from now. What do we see, and what conversations do we need to be having? And then from a property management standpoint, community connections, bringing in really unique events and community gatherings, partnering with local community leaders, really making sure it's a safe place to be. As far as challenges, there'll be challenges both from, our capital dollar doesn't go as far as it once did, but really focusing on where that dollar does go. Partnerships with good companies, good construction companies speaks a lot to it as well. And then we will always have some sort of, we always have to think far and ahead when it comes to security in general to make it a safe place to be. And so there's always tech that helps support that.
Yeah, and when I hear you say all those different things, which I totally agree with, Taryn, like what comes to mind is like there are all these drivers that you can control, and then there's so many unlimited drivers that you can't control, right? And so as a representative of a property owner, like we focus heavily on the things that we can control, because that's all you can do, right? So really focusing on those things to create the mix that, and this kind of sums up a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about, but where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, right? Like if you put together the right pieces to the puzzle, then it's 2 + 2 = 5, right? It's like you get the magic sauce that allows you to be more productive, allows your tenants to be more productive, and then ultimately attracts new tenants, right? And so to answer the question specifically, it's like what's driving it. Sometimes it's the stuff that's out of our control as property owners, brokers, people in the business, and then there are times when it's the things that you do control, and that's what we could all focus on a little bit more, I think, which is the fun part.
Great. I'm going to open up the floor to any questions. If anybody has anything, please use the microphone so we can record it.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you so much. That was great information. You spoke a lot about trends and the different factors involved in retail right now. What about like the market outlook and such? I know we don't have specifically like a real estate agent here or such, but where are lease rates at right now? Are they? Oh, sorry.
Only
Missed
25
that.
years.
All right, maybe you can help answer this question.
A little bit.
That'd be
we got a
great.
few.
That'd be great. Yeah, so where are lease rates at right now? Like, are they trending up, trending down? What are some examples of some where the lease rates are at for different
That's
kinds
a
of
loaded
properties?
question.
Totally loaded question. One thing, Maine is such an amazing state to me, and I know you guys all agree. But in each market, you've got some incredible disparity in rents, right? So, like in Freeport, Maine's a great example of that. Like there's the disparity between key, A locations and not A locations is dramatic. So, and I'd say like that's the case in every market, is where in the range of that disparity is more pronounced in when you've got certain drivers, right? So to answer your question, I think like in the A locations, great space, vacancy is very low, and meaning rents have never been higher, right? Like rents, we're able to get the best rents we've ever have been because of the lack of new space being developed, and more demand, right? So it's that simple, like in those A positions. But as you start to get, no surprise, like into the B, C, and lesser positions within a market, that's where market by market you start to see some big disparity. And I've worked, some markets are totally undershopped, and some markets are very overshopped. I work in some markets in New Hampshire, for example, where it's like the amount of commercial space that is available in the market is totally not sustainable, and therefore you get a sort of dilution of rent across that. Whereas in some, it's tight, and therefore even A, B, C, you're all getting top rents that you've ever seen. So it's a big question, and I think love to chat with you individually about a market. That's
Yeah,
best way to
and
do
if you take the downtown market, for example, if you take Exchange Street, there's lease rates that we're seeing, $75 a
Yeah.
square foot. You go one street over, literally.
Totally.
It's like $30 a square foot, so literally in half. So when I say it's a loaded question, it's an extremely loaded question, and it's really, market by market, street by street, if you're downtown, corner by corner.
Yeah.
I'm sure in the mall from, an anchor to an interior space. So it's a really tough question to answer, but Nick and I are around after because we're both on the brokerage side. So
Yeah, I think, and you have more exposure into the other asset classes, but I do think that is a retail unique kind of thing. The disparity, but maybe I'm wrong.
it's foot traffic at the end of the day. You know what I mean? It's foot traffic.
Retail's
so,
unique in that regard, I
yeah.
think. Yep.
So, Michelle.
There's been a lot of turnover with restaurants lately. Have you seen the tenants as they leave, how much FF&E they're leaving behind? And when the new tenants come in, how much fit out is the landlord taking responsibility for?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like during the pandemic, we got for a handful of these Ruby Tuesday, TGI Friday type, spaces back, which are tremendous opportunities for great, restaurateurs to take advantage of that type of investment in a space. And so that's kept me very busy over the last few years, is doing exactly that type of deal where you're taking advantage of that type of infrastructure. One thing I will say to this crowd in this city is that, like in a place like Maine, where you've got these incredible restaurateurs and people, there was this big push, of course, to all these national chains that opened up in all across the country. And I think there's like a big effort in it, and I'm a big fan of it personally as a consumer and as someone who does what I do. The people that are there and are able to put their personal touch on things and have their thumb on the pulse of a restaurant, they're going to do better than a guy who's based in Dallas managing a restaurant from thousands of miles away. And like Maine is like the perfect example of that, I think, where you've in Westbrook, go check out Rio Bravo. It used to be a Ruby Tuesdays, but this is the exact example I'm talking about. Like the owners are in there, they've got equity in the restaurant, and they got to make it successful and see it through. And no surprise that they're going to do a better business than someone who doesn't have that type of direct ownership into it. Yep.
And Michelle, to answer your question, there's obviously been a lot of restaurant turnover, especially in downtown right now, and we're seeing pretty much everything being left there. It's so much cheaper to leave it there. It's pennies on the dollar at the end of the day. It's not that it all gets reused all the time, but it's cheaper to leave it there. And depending upon the situation, there's a cost involved or not. So, yes, go ahead.
I was just going to ask a question about how you think all of this translates to kind of the smaller downtown level. Like, obviously, there's downtown Portland, which is one scale, but the rest of kind of the downtown, or not even necessarily downtown, but small town retail opportunities.
So you talking more like local tenants versus national tenants, or?
Yeah, local tenants versus national tenants, because I don't think most of the kind of smaller downtowns, like Portland is just barely burgeoning on the national market. Portland downtown, just barely burgeoning on the national market. So most of the other downtowns or village centers in the state aren't really going to be attracting national retailers. And so you talked a lot about kind of like the data-driven approach to bringing people in. So, there's tools like Placer AI or, Buxton or those kind of tools that you use. Are there models and approaches for the kind of smaller community?
Yeah, interesting question. I think that some of the elements totally transcend, like whether you're talking about Portland, which is sort of one of a kind in Maine, or smaller markets throughout Maine. And that's where I think like the mix, the curation of the types of uses, right? Like when you put together the right salon next to the right restaurant, next to the right art gallery, next to the right, it's when you put those pieces together, they can all be locals, they can all be regionals, or they can all be nationals, and it makes it's the combination of those things that creates something interesting, cool, attractive that your city, town's proud of. And so I think that's the key, is like that some of those things are totally transcend into little towns as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the tenants, I do a lot of work downtown, and I think, there's a healthy mix of both national and local tenants is really what both nationals and locals are looking for. They drive each other's business, right? So it's a good marriage in a lot of ways, and I think that's what makes small town Maine work. You can have the little boutique next to Warby Parker, who we just put in the Solis portfolio, and I think that's really what drives sales and success for both parties.
You also get the passion. You get the passion from the locals. It's their baby. They want to see it through. And it's fun to see. It's fun to see, and those are the people, at least from my perspective, that I want to help. It's like, how do we get you from here to here? We want to see it through too.
Okay, one last question.
Yeah, Nick, you talked about the tenants being really emphasizing on data-driven. What do you and WS have in your toolbox to get ahead of the tenants, and you're not really going in there and kind of selling them the dream anymore? They're kind of bringing it to you, hey, I can track all of these sales coming back to these zip codes, and I want to open your property. What are you guys using to really get ahead of that and take that sales piece back?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think like Placer was an example that got brought up, which is you guys can look it up. It's interesting information. It doesn't tell the whole story, but it's on big developers, landlords. That for them to do the same things that the tenants are doing, to understand traffic trends, where they're coming from, what have you, so that you can negotiate from a place of education as well. But I think understanding, I'm just looking at the clock here, understanding sales and occupancies and being not thinking so much about the market rent and thinking more about like what a tenant can pay as two separate things. That's a big part of what we do at WS. Yeah.
Okay, it's finally cocktail hour, guys. We've made it. So I just have a couple thank yous, or Shelly will kill me. So I want to say thank you to our gold sponsor, TD Bank North, for all of their sponsorship for us. Thank you to Autovisual Partners and Headlight AV. Thank you to Words at Work for their support and vision that's helped us today. And of course, you have to thank Shelly. She is the machine that runs this organization. I could not be the vice president of MEREDA if she was not our backbone. So a few important reminders. If you are receiving continuing education, please make sure that you have your number to Shelly or you will not get it. And for all of us brokers in the room, you get 4 credits today. Please take time to fill out the evaluation program. We'd love to hear your feedback, especially with this new format. We've taken a lot of time to try to rework this, and we really want to hear what worked today for you guys and what didn't work, and so that we can try to fold that into next year's conference. And a couple of other things coming up. We've got a morning menu on the rezoning in Portland on March 20th. That's going to be very interesting. Our Strikes for Scholars Bowl-a-thon on May 1st, and our Notable Night Spring Celebration on May 14th. So thank you guys for everything today, and get your drink tickets from Shelly as you guys head downstairs.
Thank you, Jen.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you, guys.